barreling down toward the Hawaiian Islands, dumping torrential rains.
This is the first major hurricane to hit the islands in a quarter of a century. Derrick Herndon, a researcher at the UW, specializes in the study of hurricane intensity using satellite data. Welcome. Thank you for being here
today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about Lane.
Lane's a little bit unusual in that it is, we think, one of the strongest storms to approach the Hawaiian Islands in our record. So it's not unusual to have storms near the Hawaiian Islands, but to have one this intense at the Category 4, Category 5 intensity is a bit unusual. And also the track's a little unusual coming from the south. Typically these storms come from the east, pass well south of the islands, and then weaken. So the storm is unusual in terms of its intensity and also the fact that it's making a direct approach on the islands.
And last year we saw Harvey and Irma and Maria, huge storms that again moved very slowly. Is this a trend or an anomaly?
We believe that it's a trend. So a paper was published earlier this year that looked at how hurricanes might be slowing down. And the problem with that is that you have these hurricanes that have all this moisture contained in them, and the slower the storms move, the more rainfall they're going to basically produce. So we saw that very much with Harvey, with record-producing rainfall in Texas. Lane at the moment is just crawling along at about 2 miles per hour, so that kind of fits what we think, where the storm is moving very slowly. And then you also have the added impact of the high terrain of the mountains there, which really wrings the moisture out of these storms. So we're looking at rainfall possibly of 20 to 40 inches on some of those islands.
Wow. So what can you learn when you're looking at that satellite imagery? What can you see from that?
Well, one of the things we use the satellite imagery for is to basically locate the center of the storm, because that allows us to know where the storm is moving. And then we also use the satellite data to estimate the intensity of the storm. So most of the storms that are produced on the planet, we use satellite data to analyze the structure and the intensity of these hurricanes or typhoons if they're in the Western Pacific. So in the case of Lane, we actually had aircraft flying into the storm, but because the aircraft are flying out of Hawaii, they had to stop operations. So the Hurricane Center there in Hawaii is basically using the satellite data, and some of the products that are produced at the university actually are being used to estimate the intensity of Lane.
And we see, you know, when they start forecasting and tracking hurricanes, you see that cone.
Right. And
using those satellites, that helps predict all of these different paths that you see?
The satellite data is primarily used to feed data into the computer models which produce those tracks. So think about over the ocean, we don't have a lot of observations, maybe an island here, a ship there, vast areas where there's no data, so the satellite data is very important in terms of providing the observations for the models that produce those tracks.
Are we getting better at that?
We are actually getting better at that. We can really show fairly solidly that we've improved our ability to forecast where hurricanes are going to go, where they're going to make landfall. Now, Lane's a little bit of an anomaly in that regard, in that its forecast track is very complicated, and that the storm is moving towards the islands but is expected to make a very hard turn to the left towards the west, and it hasn't made that turn yet. We think it'll happen in the next 24 hours or so. That's going to be key, because if it keeps going, it'll basically move right over the islands, but if it moves to the west sooner, then it'll avoid a direct landfall on the islands.
But
so a little more uncertainty there.
It's moving so slowly. Why is that?
The reason it's moving slowly in this case is that the steering flow above the hurricane is basically what we call collapsed. Typically these storms are steered by the trade winds, which move towards the west at this latitude, but those winds have basically weakened over the storm and caused it to kind of stall. And an upper level area of lower pressure off to the west of the storm is kind of pushing it north now, just kind of drifting north very, very slowly. But we think that eventually the storm will basically be sheared in half. The top part of the storm will go one way, the bottom half will go the other way. And that bottom half will basically drift off to the west eventually, and the system will begin to weaken.
That's the best hope.
That is the best hope. We really hope that the storm will weaken. We still think there'll be heavy rainfall, but in terms of wind impacts and storm surge, there will be an issue. There will probably be some damage and some power outages, but as for having a Category 4 hurricane hitting that area, that looks unlikely at this point. The storm should continue to weaken.
That's the good news.
Good.
Yes.
And it's Mother Nature, you never know.
It's very true.
Derrick, thanks for being with us today. Very fascinating work.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. There's more to come at 4 if you're